Next, I would like to introduce first of all, introduce our event. This is our first of what we believe will be monthly or almost monthly events for CNIE, the Canadian Network for Innovation in Education. For some of you, I believe it's your first event with us. If it is, we're really delighted to have you. Some of you, it's not your first event. You went to the conference at Concordia last year. We're excited to have you here at another type of event. We have some old faces back here. I mean, not old faces, but people we haven't seen in a while. How about that? After that comment about Big Bang Theory and all the rude people, I have to be careful what I say. Anyway, but we're delighted to see you all today. And the theme of today is open. Although I see everybody has closed their cameras in honor of our open presentation. And it's got two parts. The first one will be presentation of, it's a showcase of one of the award-winning entries in the CNIE annual awards competition. And I want to give a shout out to Carol Sparks, who not only is our vice president, but also helped co-coordinate that event, that competition, and is working on the one for this year and has made it look like it's easy when it's not. And then the second part will be some speed networking, which I think we're going to do a little different given the size of group that we are. If we grow, then we'll do something different. But in the meantime, I want to thank everyone for being here. Cindy, did you have a comment, or are you just saying congrat? You know, I wasn't quite sure with the hand gesture there.
I'm practicing using the reactions button,
Okay.
and that was a clap for Carol, but it was late. So
Okay.
my
Let's
apologies
sure
for
I
the
didn't-
interruption.
By the way,
I was
Yeah.
just typing in the chat. Let me just say Kelly Brennan was huge in the awards showcase.
oh yes, do not want to.
organization as well.
And Kelly would be here today, but unfortunately, something came up and she is not able to be here today. But it has nothing to do with any of you, especially you,
Great.
our speaker.
Thank you.
So what I'd like to do is get started with the first part of our presentation. And this is the showcase part. And it's very exciting. It's about open education, which I know is a passion of at least GA. I hope it's a semi-passion, at least, of the students who took our open educational resources course last summer. And it's a big thing that goes on at Thompson Rivers, where Carol works with her colleagues. And one of the things that's interesting about this particular showcase, it's not just simply showcasing a project itself, but it's also about how to use them. It's really, the emphasis is not on the resources, but on the pedagogy behind it and with it. And Michael Dabrowski, who is the coordinator of Spanish at Athabasca University, and also a member of the CNIE board, and longtime supporter of our organization and the field, is going to share with us today your particular open educational resource, which also, in addition to other things, allowed students to tailor the course and the experience to their own needs. So, Michael, take it away.
Oh dear, I think I'm going to have to redo the presentation from scratch then. Okay, so
just give us what you got.
Just making sure that you can see the PowerPoint right now.
Beautifully, and it's a very well done one.
Well, thank you. All right, well, so hello everybody. Thanks for taking an interest in open education and the presentation of this project. So as Saul said, my name is Michael Dabrowski. I'm a coordinator of Spanish at Athabasca. I'm also a sessional at the University of Calgary teaching Spanish, and I'm an EdD student at Athabasca University as well. So there's a lot of Alberta connections going on. I've been involved or obsessed with open education over a decade. And during that process, my focus, a lot like Saul was mentioning in the intro, has shifted from the low-cost free resources to more of the open learning environment and what the open pedagogies offer the classroom and the students and the professor as well. I'll give you a quick background of how this project kind of came to be, how it all evolved, and how it's morphed over time and where it's gotten to. Then I'll show you a little bit about the guts of the project and how it looks on the inside. And then hopefully we can have a meaningful discussion. I think we talked with Saul. If you have any questions at any point, just feel free to unmute yourself and ask, and we can deal with them then if you prefer, or we can wait till the end. I won't be looking at the chat because I'm looking at my screen. So if you could speak, that would be much appreciated. So the sort of big move started in 2015 when I got, what? The whole move started in 2015. I got an OER Creation Award from Alberta Advanced Education to create a first semester Spanish resource. It's currently being used in Athabasca as a core tool, and it's being used at some other universities sort of as ancillary grammar materials. While I enjoy grammar teaching, the real passion lies in literature. That's what I studied at university, and the creative process. So I've been teaching a composition and critical analysis course since 2003, starting at U of C and then recreated it at Athabasca. And it offered opportunities to explore collaborative creation, editing, and publishing that really altered the way I teach the course and what it offers. So the course itself is a second-year post-secondary course in Spanish language within a language and literature stream. So the students have typically taken a couple years of grammar, and now they're starting to get into the reading of literature and writing some more complicated sentences. The typical learning objectives of the course are to improve language use, obviously, but also to read critically and to begin analyzing texts, not just reading the sentences, but actually the meaning behind them. Typically, the existing textbooks out there for this kind of a course, they see the process through the lens of analyzing canonical literary texts. And since this is sort of the main focus of second language departments at universities, that's the comfort zone of all the professors. I kind of strayed from that as well, so I'll tell you about that as well. So, as I said, I started in 2003 at the University of Calgary using a traditional textbook. I was really disappointed by the student engagement during the first run in 2006. I incorporated more of a collaboration component. I would sit them down, have them edit each other's works, comment on them, discuss them, and stuff like that. It worked better. The students worked more and learned better, but they continued to create disposable assignments. David Wiley really kind of nailed this for me when I was reading through his posts, that it really hit home. I have created disposable assignments. I disposed of them sometimes even without looking at the professor's comments, because that's kind of what they're made for. They're made to get a grade and then to throw away. They're not really part of that learning process as much, unless you're really dedicated. I asked some of my students to share their texts by releasing copyrights. And then I learned about Creative Commons licensing, and I got really excited. And since then, I've been asking students to release their works under Creative Commons. In 2010, we offered the same course at Athabasca. Just because of online learning and stuff, there's sufficient demand for that as well. And right now, there are about 60 students per year between the two universities going through this course. They create some really neat stuff. And then I decided a few years ago that I'd help future students by removing the cost of their textbook. And so we created an OER. Then I started using collaborative assignments, and then everything morphed into open pedagogy, and disruption followed. So I'll tell you a little bit about what the class looks like, and you'll see sort of the challenges. So the typical cohort is varied. I did sort of a breakdown of one of the classes. It consisted of 16% of the students being majors in Spanish, 16. The other 84% was in archaeology, international business, international relations, education, biosci, chemistry, natural science, visual studies, actuarial science, marketing, English, philosophy, psychology, sociology, and kinesiology. As you can tell, a very, very monolithic kind of group. So my thought was, when you have a bunch of different fruit and veggies, you obviously have to make a smoothie. So I started blending them together. Spanish major students typically continue into literature, but the vast majority, the 84%, may or may not take another course, maybe two, just to meet language requirements, and then they drop off the map. So really prepping them to know the literature of the Spanish world doesn't serve as huge a purpose for them. So I was looking for a subject matter that would engage everybody equally. I lucked out and I found the Sustainable Development Goals. The United Nations has these 17 wonderful goals for where humanity needs to be. We're failing on most of them, so there's something to look at. But what it does is it allows the students to look at the Spanish learning through their interests. Typically, if you're doing education, you can look at one of the SDGs and focus on how education is working in the world. If you're in economics, you can look at the world through the economic lens and stuff like that. And I forced them to work together rather than in competition with each other. And I think that's where the open pedagogy really starts to bear fruit. So as I said, I created these links into this. The basic focus was quality education, and all of these are in Spanish. If you want, you can look them up for the English versions. Getting them working together and creating OERs and all of this setting that foundation was really a big lift for an educator in the classroom. After that, it all really was quite smooth. So in 2018, the students worked in class on the basis of an informal agreement between us that our common goal was to create some materials that could be used in the future. That was the whole course outline. By 2019, they were able to work from a skeletal framework of a textbook with some content in there that sort of made them aware of where the book was going. And by 2020, they continued developing materials, adding more content and stuff like that. And the process really is continuing to develop today as I add material as it comes in. So this is an OER textbook that keeps getting published through open pedagogies, and I think it's absolutely fascinating how it works. All the material that they're creating are reusable assignments, and the fact that they're used for others and other students can edit those assignments and take advantage of learning process as they go forward. So this was the course, 17 sustainable goals. They write case studies, they have daily discussions, they write short fiction, and they do research essays. And the class basically, whether it's physical, hybrid, or online, is dedicated to oral discussion and debate, while the asynchronous collaborative peer activities are really focused on the grammar, the editing, and sort of that iterative improvement of the text that they're developing in the course. And so you get a lot of layering going on. You get language, you get global awareness. I think it's been a wonderful hit. To add to the mess, and to keep with the idea of open, I've been toying with giving them additional flexibility in the way they deliver some of the writings. The beginning things are kind of to build up their language skills and familiarity with tools, so they don't have as much flexibility, but you'll notice those last activities, they all occur concurrently in the last month or so. And I basically let them hand them in whenever they feel like it. They can hand all of them in at once. They can hand in one after another. They can start at the end and work forward, whatever, to try and give them some of that sense of openness and flexibility. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about where the project's kind of heading and how it's working out. And then, like I said, if you have any questions or stuff, just feel free to ask. So those assignments that you saw on that list with the presentations and the different writing stuff, once they start writing texts, other students peer review those texts. They participate in discussions. They write a glossary of difficult words. So rather than having me generate a preconceived idea of what's difficult for students to read, they generate their own glossary. They write short textual questions for the works of other students that they've read. So basically just like comprehension questions. Then they write extended questions about the topics that the texts that the students have written cover, and also create discussion topics that tie in the sustainable development goals in with the text. So if you have a short story about water conservation, then the discussion topic would emerge into something about, you know, global water systems or something along those lines. And then we use all of those questions and discussions in the classroom to trigger further discussion and collaborative work in the class. So obviously, Spanish course, one of the goals is to learn language. You'll see that there's a fairly iterative process. The peer review, they review, they argue about grammar, and they teach rules and vocabulary to each other. So because I use Google Docs, I can have entire discussions on the side of the document explaining a particular rule of grammar, why it's appropriate in this sentence and not. You can tell the text gets pretty marked up, and it's a really interesting mix of having native and heritage speakers, which are in the class, that have no trouble speaking and using vocabulary, but they may not know how to spell things properly, and they may lack some of the grammatical rules and foundations. They combine with grammar students who have exactly the opposite problem. They know the rules, but they lack the diversity of expression and have trouble with the oral components. I typically try and mix and match them so that they will benefit most from each other. And it really is quite amazing to see people who were uncomfortable with Spanish initially teaching grammar to native speakers. What an ego boost that is. And vice versa, students that, you know, think they know everything, learn that they don't, and then acquire that information. So there's a really nice synergy of having sort of a mixed bag of students in the class. As I mentioned, they go through every text that they read and highlight and translate difficult words. I used to do this when I was reading Spanish texts, but I had to do it with a physical dictionary. It was a lot of work. Moodle allows something that is a little bit easier, in that you can have this text, for example, and you'll see a couple words that are in blue. There's a glossary tool in Moodle, and when they click on it, it gives them the English version right on the back. So that's a student selected word. So obviously some student coming along decided that's a word that most people don't know, or at least I didn't. Therefore, it'd be useful for the next reader to have it. So it makes the textbook a little bit more interactive, and it's student driven rather than professor driven. So now a little bit about what they're doing as far as the critical analysis and creativity in the content. Okay, so when you visit the content, and I will give you a link to it at the end of the presentation, you'll see student names. They've chosen to attach their actual names to their work. Each one of the works is licensed under the Creative Commons by Share Alike license. The works have all gone through a peer review process in the class. It continues to go through peer review as new cohorts take up the textbook. The questions, discussion topics are constantly being evolved and grown as new groups of students run through the material. And before publishing these tests and questions, I've also had graduate students do a final detailed review to polish the texts. So my hope is that on top of the undergraduate students that are taking advantage of this material as part of their learning, I'm hoping that graduate students are also having the opportunity to read through, edit, and sort of polish and perfect their grading skills or error finding skills, or however you want to phrase it. This is what the course looks like. The content, stories, then you have the comprehension questions and the discussion topics. Each story or case study has that full similar structure. All that material is there for the students to use and go through, and it basically simulates having a full-on textbook, except that it's growing and dynamic. They also learn culture, which is a key component of language learning as well. But since the students are in control of the content, each one of them enters the Hispanic culture from their point of interest. The diversity of perspective is interesting for their peers, and the peer-generated content inspires students in their work and engages them with issues of social responsibility, which I also thought was really key. One of the big debates going on about in OER circles is sort of about access, about democratizing OERs and all those kinds of things. And I thought it'd be really useful to have students, in addition to the language and the culture, to start thinking about social justice and equity as part of their learning process, that critical thinking component. So every student chooses their topic for the case studies, which was kind of where I was hoping it would start delving into that responsibility. The suggestion that I made is that they explore any NGO that is small scale and is tackling one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. I didn't want them to do huge organizations because in the amount of text that they can write, they can't do any real justice to it. So I would rather they take a deep look at something small than a very superficial look at something that's just too big. So the open topic allows them to write about issues that are of interest to them and typically within their discipline or disciplinary studies. So this student, for example, looked at some poverty initiatives in El Salvador to try and raise the standard of living a little bit. This one explored work done by an environmentalist NGO in Chile, starting and maintaining parks and reserves, trying to preserve the biodiversity of the region. That was very cool. This student looked at an NGO that is sharing new farming techniques with local communities in Guatemala and is distributing fortified seed that help reduce the infant nutrition levels in the country that are apparently abysmally low and have lifelong effects on the children. And then I had one student, which was quite unique, mature student. She wrote about her personal experience of volunteering in Mexico. Yearly, she organizes expeditions of high school age students to Mexico to build housing for the poor out of used plastic drink containers. And they introduce water filtration systems to reduce the spread of disease in the communities. As you can see, the topics are really diverse. They're very real to students. And in this case, this student was able to write about something that she's engaged with personally that has meaning. And I'm hoping that the other students, as they engage with this kind of peer work, they learn about the culture, they learn about the challenges of those societies and some of the solutions that are being explored. All right, so OERs are great. Open pedagogy can be a little bit scary. So I basically started wanting to create an OER to use in my class and save some money for the students and have a little bit more control in the classroom. made a lot of sense to me. And as the process moved forward, it made a little bit less sense. So looking back on it, biggest challenge was walking into a classroom with no textbook and basically to teach from absolutely nothing. In all 3 years of teaching this course using the open model, I've been amazed by the enthusiasm and effort put in by the students. Quite often we kind of assume that they're just there to get their grades and get out. But when the work is more fun, attractive, and challenging, they really engage and participate. And I think they experience more of the learning opportunities that they can. I get to witness the pride and of ownership, creation, and sharing that develops in these students, and a lot of confidence as well. And they amaze me with the quality of work produced and the level of effort they dedicate to the creation of materials for their peers, not so much for themselves anymore. So as a professor, it's a little bit hard to give up control over the content, but I'd like to encourage everyone to do it because the results are amazing. The scary part was I got the feeling after a while that they really didn't need a teacher or a textbook, that they were doing it just fine all by themselves and self-learning, and that I was superfluous. So it kind of challenged my self-definition, and I re-examined what it was to be a teacher, to teach and to learn. And I think the eventual outcomes really benefit both the students and me on that journey of open practices and opening up the world, I guess, to sort of different ways of doing things. So if you can give up control, trust the students, be flexible, commit the time so the students have the autonomy and opportunities for discovery, it'll be great. And personally, it was a wonderful learning opportunity because there's a lot of stuff that I don't know about, particularly in other disciplines, because my studies have focused on the literary side. And it was wonderful to get input from students in other disciplines and what they thought was interesting. Realistically, the course created something from nothing. And I thought that was the most exciting part. And I think that should be the definition of open pedagogical practices. Just to sort of finish off a little bit of what the students thought about it. So I was really worried about how students would react to not having anything to glom onto as far as textbook outline or anything like that. Overall, the reflections were positive for all the iterations of the course. Many of the students talked about how much they enjoyed the class, how much they learned, about their voice being listened to, sort of all of the kind of key statements that I was desperately hoping for, that open pedagogy would open up. At least one or two students sort of hit those high points. And I thought that was just absolutely wonderful. And obviously some of them writing in English, some of them in Spanish. There's some mistakes in the Spanish and stuff. It's all good. The process is not perfect. The learning is what's important. And I had one student that really kind of exemplified for me the benefits of using both the Sustainable Development Goals, but also that open framework and being open to everything as part of a learning journey. So this is a Colombian who's studying finance. And he says, this course has given me a wider perspective into international matters that affect us all as a whole. Well, wonderful. That's part of education. So that's great. We become ignorant and neglect people in need, making us lose track of what really matters. Oh my goodness, that sounds like social responsibility starting. I hope the opportunity will present itself for me to make a difference. Well, that is being responsible. It's to our benefit to ensure the well-being of everyone living in the world. That's kind of a first. Normally, most people just talk about themselves. And I think the added benefit was, this is a heritage speaker. He felt that he managed to reconnect with his roots and through these courses, get a little better understanding of who he is. So I think a wonderful feeling all around. So I would strongly recommend the open pedagogy as a tool. So here's the invitation. There's a code you can scan here to get to the textbook on the Athabasca site. You do not need to create an account to access the materials. You can log in as a guest. I want to thank CNIE for the excellence and innovation in the integration of technology in a partnership or collaboration award. It's a mouthful, so it's very good. It was a collaboration with students, and I want to thank all of them for the patience and goodwill as the project was taking shape. If it was disconcerting for me to be in a classroom without a textbook, I'm sure they were at least equally anxious, considering their grades and futures were on the line as they were going through the course. Without students open to work and contribute to the commons for the benefit of others, this project and the ones that follow would not be possible. Their courage and commitment to the learning process needs to be recognized and appreciated by all of us. So thanks for listening. And if you have any questions, please let me know. I will give you my contact information, and that code again is also at the bottom there to take you to the course materials.
Thank you, Michael. We've got a few minutes for questions, so if anybody has any, and I think I see Cindy raising her hand. So you're the first one I saw, so I'm going to start with you.
Okay, well, I'll get it over with rather quickly. Michael, I want to ask you about your original funding. As you know, I was involved in the distribution of those funds at Athabasca at that time from the Alberta government. And I'm wondering whether you would have had A, the courage, B, the skills, C, the whatever, to go ahead and do something like this without that original funding. Was it valuable to you? And yeah, start there.
Okay, so I guess the answer would be no, I wouldn't have, and no, and yes, it was really very helpful. Yeah, well, like I was dabbling in OERs as sort of piecemeal items. So I develop a sheet that you're sharing with people for how to conjugate a verb or do something along those lines. But it was sort of very piecemeal, very small scale, and the Alberta funding really got me to focus on developing an entire course content package. And I realized that doing something large scale was entirely possible, as opposed to just focusing on sort of a one-day activity or a 1 hour activity. So it definitely helped, number one. Number two, it gave me exposure to using students to help me develop content. So even for the grammar content, I had students, when I would get into class, I would ask the students to help me write sample questions to basically create test banks for how to conjugate this verb or how to use this family vocabulary and things like that. So I got a little bit more used to the idea of engaging students in creating materials as well. So the benefits were enormous. And I also participated with a lot of professors across the country in sort of their pedagogy and how they teach and stuff. So it also gave me a wider perspective rather than just sort of my tunnel vision on how to deliver material. So yeah, the project was instrumental in my learning and growth, as far as even just the confidence of trying to develop course materials and walking into a classroom unprepared as well. That I needed some confidence to be able to do that. So yes, it was a wonderful project. Funding was great, but mostly it was a great learning experience. So thanks for endorsing it.
Well, and thank you for taking it up, because I think nobody would necessarily have expected that a simple OER funding project would expand and deliver as much as you've just described to us. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for showing us how it's turned out, because it's pretty impressive all in all.
Well, thank you.
And it won an award, no wonder. Any other questions for Michael before we switch into the networking mode?
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm currently working on an OER project with the students from the instructional design class, and their project is actually to develop to teach faculty how to design renewable assignments. So I was just wondering how, when you decided upon your renewable assignments, what type of framework did you use to guide you?
Well, so I guess this might depend on, I'm lucky in a lot of ways in that Spanish is what they're really supposed to be learning. Everything else around it is kind of a bonus, but it's not the end goal. Their Spanish is going to be far from perfect. So when they're delivering all these Spanish projects, there's inherent iterations built into them for the editing and stuff. So that's where it becomes renewable, where the next student that picks it up can look through it, find errors in it, make comments and stuff like that. I don't know if it's going to be quite as easy if you've got, native language speakers and stuff like that. The main goal for me was to make sure that everything they did could be recycled into the next course. And because the OER is live, then whenever they come up with a new addition, a new change, a new piece of vocabulary, whatever, we can add that in. So it creates that sort of iterative cycle where they're constantly going through the revision.
Mhm.
I would imagine as long as you make everything live so that it can have that iterative cycle, and I don't know if you'll be able to do that if you're creating a tool for faculty, whether you'll have that flexibility to be editing it as the faculty are using it, or whether a lot of institutions are still quite locked into this idea that it has to be fixed, it has to be the same every semester, everyone needs the same learning experience. And I think part of the embracing of open pedagogy is that learning is individual, and there is no need for everyone to have the exact same learning trajectory. As long as that learning is happening, that's what, to me, what open education is about. But and the sun just came out. That's very, very timely. So yeah, I think that would be my only, challenge if you're delivering something for university institutional consumption rather than a classroom consumption, but just make it somehow so that it's a dynamic process that can keep evolving as the next person goes through it. And then you've got a reusable assignment as opposed to something that just gets created and gets ignored afterwards.
Thank you.
Thank
I hope
you.
that helps.
Carol, and this will be the last question. Then we're going to do some speed networking before we close. So Carol, ask.
Great, thank you. Let me just say, wonderful presentation. Delighted that you've gotten the award for this. It's marvelous. I was curious, are you involved in reviewing what is put up? Is there any potential for students to be spreading the incorrect information? So they're correcting something, but they're correcting it incorrectly. Do you then have to review that?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's definitely the potential, and typically what ends up happening, because they're all engaged in the Google Docs document, a raging debate will happen. So I talked yesterday about Spanish. You'll get a comment, no, it's I talked yesterday. And someone will say, no, I was talking yesterday. No. Oh, no, you can't use this one because that's what it means. And you will get that kind of dialogue between students. Typically, at some point, they kind of hash it out and they all agree, yeah, I looked that up online. You're right. Okay, you're correct. But if not, I look into those Google Docs as well. And then I'll come in at some point and say, no, this is the right answer. This is why. So, Bob was right, Mary, you were wrong, and on we go. But they still get the opportunity to kind of hash out and search out their own answers and come to their own conclusions before I just butt in and say, here's the answer, here's the answer, here's the answer, I know it all. I want them to do that exploration on their own, because ultimately that's what I want from them long-term, is to be able to learn by themselves and acquire more information by themselves, rather than always looking for a professor to sort of resolve their ambiguities or insecurities and stuff like that. So that correction process is there, but I try and back off as much as possible to give them the chance to do sort of their open learning by themselves before I close it off and tell them what the right answer is.
Great. Thank you.
And
Really
thank you
appreciate it.
so much. Let's give a round of applause to Michael. Now, because I promised speed networking, I would like to actually have us do at least one round of it. And these are the instructions which I'll also put in the broadcast message. I'm going to break you into 2 rooms. There'll be 4 in one and 5 in the other. And if you could turn on your camera so you can all see each other, that would be great when that happens. Second, what I'd like you to do is, when you get there, introduce yourself one person at a time, and then talk about whether you have used OER or open educational resources yourself, and whether you've created them, used them, or both. So everybody kind of got an idea what you're supposed to do. So I'm going to split you into groups, and I'm going to stop recording.